This is an interview with Gloria and Kenneth Wapnick on the 11th of September 1998 at Roscoe, New York. So Ken, we're going to start with you and ask you about your home background, your childhood, and your religious upbringing.
Okay. I was born in 1942 in Brooklyn.
Should be fine.
Brooklyn, New York, and my family were Jewish. And like most Jews during that period, they were more Jewish in their cultural identification than in any kind of religious belief. Which means that we observed the major Jewish holidays, and we kept a kosher home because my grandmother was kosher. But there was no real feeling of God in the house or anything like that. And I was sent to a parochial school, a yeshiva, it's called, for the elementary school, part of my education, the first 8 grades. And that meant that Hebrew was studied in the morning and then all the English subjects in the afternoon. And this was so basically because it was a way that my parents could send me to a private school that was in the neighborhood, so that I get a very good English education. And I didn't like it all that much, actually. And by the time I realized how much I didn't like Hebrew, I was already in the 6th grade, and my parents said that if I wanted to change and go to public school, I could. But I felt, well, my friends were here, I might as well just graduate. So that's what I did. And I did very, very well in English, but not very, very well in Hebrew. And I basically resented all the stuff that they were teaching us, as if it were factual. And it made no sense to me that God would do the kinds of things that was described. And the way that it was taught was really without any kind of practical application or any real sense of spiritual feeling. It was just, this is what the Bible says, this is what Jews believe, and this is what you have to memorize, that kind of stuff.
So things you didn't like were things like Sodom and Gomorrah?
Sodom and Gomorrah, and all, yes, I didn't like all that. I didn't like all the blood stuff, the killing. I remember once we were being taught how God had made the sun stand still so that Joshua could win a battle, and I leaned over to my friend across the aisle, and we both listed both to ourselves that this was nonsense. So that there was no sense of a living God. There was a sense of this kind of omnipresent God who somehow did things in an omnipotent way, but that there was no real sense of God's presence in your life.
Did you feel that was something you wanted to find?
No. I had no interest in God whatsoever. And when I graduated after the 8th grade, and I went to a regular public high school, I really felt it was the last time I'd ever think about God again. I mean, I was not interested.
Their system is a little different. So we do 8 grades.
It's 8 grades, yeah. So it was from the age basically to 5 or 6 to 13.
And then we go to high school for 4 years.
For 4 years, right. So that's between roughly 13 and 17 or 14 and 18. I had learned Hebrew, and to this day I could still speak it and read it. I mean, it's a little weak, but I can still do it. And I did learn what the Jewish belief system is. And we read the Torah 3 times in the course of the 8 years, etc. So that I had a very thorough Hebrew education. But when I left, I was done with it. That's what I thought. And a couple of years later, my mother thought that it would be nice if her 2 sons began to develop an interest in classical music. So she joined the classical music club, and so began to get records. And so I began listening. And very slowly, I began really to like it. And I would say that for the next 10, 15 years of my life, that music was my religion. And over a period of time, I began to have inner experiences as I was listening to Beethoven and Mozart.
Yes, this is one thing I wanted to ask you about. I can understand it. I get an emotional response listening to music, but to you, it was more than that.
It was more than that. It was more than that. There is an emotional thing in music, and I felt that I began to love opera. I used to go to operas, and opera is very emotional, and to this day I love opera. But that's different than this. This was like a much deeper feeling. I could hear in the music there was something more than what I would feel normally, and I didn't know what it was. at this point because I was still in high school when it started. But I knew there was something, and without question, through the rest of high school, college, and graduate school, and beyond graduate school, music was the most important thing for me. About the same time that I began to develop an interest in music, I started reading Freud. And I was always an avid reader as a child, and somebody had mentioned Freud in high school in a class or something. And I was in the library looking for some books to get, and it was almost as if a book fell out of the shelf. It was almost like that because I had no interest. I wasn't really looking specifically. But I remembered the name Freud, and the book was a little book by Calvin Hall called A Freudian Primer. And basically it's a standard kind of basic introduction to Freudian theory. And I read it and I liked it. God, to this day, I don't know how much I understood. I was a junior in high school, about 15 or 16. But something really piqued my interest. And I began reading everything. I read Interpretation of Dreams. I read a lot of other books by Freud. I began to read other books about other theorists, etc. And somewhere in there, I decided that what I would do is I'd become a psychologist. And I didn't give it another thought after that. I was not interested in becoming a psychiatrist. Of course, I was not interested in studying chemistry or physics or biology. And so I thought, I want to get my doctorate in clinical psychology. And that's what I did. And I never questioned it. And when I went to college, I majored in psychology. I took more literature courses than I did psych courses, but I took what I had to take. And somewhere in college, I became aware that there was really like two parts now in my life. There was the outer part that was studying psychology and preparing to become a psychologist. And the other part, there was my Beethoven Mozart part. And that's how I thought of it. And I'd cut classes and go into the New York City to attend concerts and operas, and I'd listen to music. And my interest in music was really deepening, and I was becoming more and more and more aware that there was something in this music and in the way I was experiencing it that was not covered in anything I read. And much as I liked Freud and admired Freud and a lot of other people, I knew that they were not talking about this one point. Mm-hmm. But I never experienced it as a conflict. It was just like I was aware of like two tracks going on. And I graduated. I went to graduate school. And I had expected that graduate school would be very, very difficult. But actually it wasn't for me. I had already read everything, and I was a good student, and I liked it, and I understood it. So I had a lot of time on my hands, so I would cut classes there too and go to New York. And
what would graduate school be now? Right?
Oh, graduate school would be, I had my bachelor's degree from the university, I guess you would say. Yes, now I was doing my doctorate. So we have undergraduate school, which I guess would be your university, and then graduate school, which is
well, you do 4 years of undergraduate
school,
and then 4 years, 2 years for master's, and then 4 more years for doctorate, and it depends on the program.
2 more years, right. So anyway, so that's where I was. I was now 22, I guess. And so there too, I'd leave class early or cut classes and go to New York to attend concerts or operas. And I was listening to music, and my interest in music was now really deepening, and I was getting to, I think, the core of Beethoven's music. I was aware that somehow Mozart was still a little beyond. I was aware that there was something in Mozart that much as I loved him, it was like, it was beyond where I was.
So just maybe on a little bit, your thesis was mentioned with schizophrenia?
No, it wasn't. What happened with that was in my second year of graduate school, for the first time I experienced a real conflict. And I realized for the first time there was something very wrong now with what I was doing. That on the one hand, I did fine in my courses, and I liked working with people. I mean, that was never a problem for me. But I believed in nothing that I was studying. And the only thing that really was important to me was this music, and getting to the depth of whatever this music was awakening me. And for the first time, I began again seriously to think maybe I should leave graduate school and just do something with music, because that's really what I love. And I realized after a while that wasn't going to work either, because I wasn't interested in studying music, because I'd be back in the same box I'd be in psychology. My musical ability is very limited. Yes. Yes, I do have a baton I conduct. And I used to go to concerts and operas and bring my baton and stand off in the corner and conduct. So, but I don't play the clarinet all that well, which is the instrument I play, and I can't sing at all. But I love music and I could hear very well. At any rate, I realized that I could not make a career in music. I wasn't interested in being an academic musician. So I just thought I would just stick it out. And when the time came for me to do my dissertation, I made the cardinal mistake, or committed the cardinal sin of any graduate student, and that was I was going to do a serious thesis and a meaningful dissertation. Right? And I can't tell you how many students I have advised over the years not to do that. But there was nobody advising me, and I was going to do a meaningful study, right? A meaningful thesis. And in Adelphi, which was the university I was going to, the norm was, as it was throughout the country, that when you did a dissertation, that you did research, like you did an experiment. But Adelphi, in principle, would allow a student to do what they would call a non-empirical study. In other words, that you would not have to do research. You could write about something, you know. But nobody had ever done that. And so I decided, since the most...
You just get material from...
In other words, that you would write about a subject, but you wouldn't have to do a study. You wouldn't have to interview subjects and run data. And that's typically what you have to do. Yeah, I mean, you have to do a whole thing. So the most important... Yeah.
You lost me slightly, but
Yes.
why did you want to do a serious thesis if you were disillusioned with the subject?
Well, but I felt, yes, I was, but I felt if I'm going to finish this and get my PhD, then at least I want to do something meaningful. It was and I think what it was unconsciously was an attempt on my part to begin to bridge this gap.
Okay.
You see, I had these two tracks that were going like this, separate directions, and somehow if I was going to continue and get my doctorate, I had to somehow make it more meaningful for me. Well, since the most meaningful thing for me at that point was Beethoven, I thought, well, I'll do my dissertation on Beethoven. It was a way of trying to integrate these two aspects of my life. So I spoke to different people on the faculty, because you have to have a committee and a chairman, and the faculty liked me. And so a number of people said to me that they would support me, and they would anything I would do, they would back, but they couldn't be my chairman because they didn't know anything about it. One person on the faculty said that he was interested in all this and interested in mysticism, but that I would have to do a study, an empirical study. I said, well, if I do an empirical study, I defeat my whole purpose because that's not meaningful. You can't study this objectively. At any rate, to make a very long story short, I ended up realizing I would never get it through doing it on Beethoven's music. And I became more and more interested in mysticism, and the more that I read about mystics, the more I realized, well, they're writing about the same kind of thing. I could identify with what they were talking about. They called it God, I didn't have a name for it. And they described a process. And I could see a process in Beethoven's music over the years. And I could see that same process mirrored in myself. It was a process of getting closer and closer to whatever it was. Again, in those years I didn't call it God. But anyway, that's what I was interested in. So I ended up doing it on Teresa of Avila, who was a Spanish mystic of the 16th century. And of all the mystics, she's the only one who writes personally. All the others write more theoretically, and they write about their experiences, but they don't write from their experiences. And she did.
She was Saint Teresa.
Yeah, Saint Teresa of Avila. Yeah, she's a famous mystic. So I read her, and I liked her very much, and so it ended up she was the subject of my study. And so again, that's a long story how I finally got it through. The part on schizophrenia was a section in the thesis. It was a chapter, and actually I thought it was one of the best chapters in the thesis. But I had to take it out because otherwise I would not have gotten it approved. And I had to rewrite it and do it in another way. It ended up that my chairman, who became a friend, who was a friend of mine, at the last minute he became my chairman. He was not a clinician. And so he says that I can't share a study that's on schizophrenia because I don't know anything about it. So I had to change what it was. But the chapter was really very good. So as I took it out, I rewrote it, and I published it. and that's how you heard about
So what was the title?
it. Of the article was
No, of
the thesis was the psychology of the mystical experience.
Okay.
And what I ended up doing was taking Teresa's experiences and analyzing them from the point of view of the three major schools in psychology: psychoanalysis, behaviorism, and existentialism. And I analyzed her experience from the point of view of these three schools, and then I critiqued their analysis, and then I gave my own.
To what extent did that study sort of lay the foundation, you think, of what was to come?
Well, I think what it did two things. First, I spent 2 years with this woman, and who was very Christian, and at that point I had no interest in Jesus, I had no interest in God. And I used her experiences as a metaphor. You know, she's writing about something that's more abstract. You know. But I spent 2 years at least, I don't know how long it was, but a long time reading her, and she did not write a lot, so I could spend a lot of time on a relatively small body of information. And I liked it, and I really resonated with it. And so, in a sense, looking at it from now, you know, looking back in retrospect, it was a way to get me more comfortable with Jesus and more comfortable with God. In the process of working on it, before I narrowed it down to Teresa, I read a lot of Hindu and Buddhist mysticism, as well as some Jewish mysticism. And so I became aware and acquainted with the whole kind of universality of this experience. And realized, again, that... Huh? I'm sorry?
The Gita.
The Bhagavad Gita. Oh, yes, I read the Bhagavad Gita, I read the Upanishads, I read most of the Vedas, and I read a great deal, and I liked everything I read. And I said, yeah, this is true. And I knew it was true because of my own experience. It was not something that was heady. And I realized this is the same thing Beethoven went through in his life. And I was also where Mozart did not, because he had no process. He was like a direct channel. I think that's the way Helen was, actually. But in Beethoven, you get a process. In Teresa, you get a process. And I could feel that same process in myself. So that's what I think the dissertation did. And when I finished it, and I realized that the significance of it was not in the body of work, because it was all right. I mean, I'd write it much differently today about doing it, but that it was the whole process of doing it, of getting it, of believing in myself that I could do it, working with the politics of the university to get it accepted, and that it was the first major step I felt in integrating these two parts of myself. And so I felt very pleased when it was done, not so much because I got it done, I got my degree, but even more I think that I felt that I had accomplished something that was internal. So
you moved to your monastic design?
Yes, well, I was married at that point, and my marriage was really, my wife and I were really growing apart. I think as I was becoming more comfortable with this inner side of me, Ruth was becoming more uncomfortable, and we just kind of grew apart. And so we separated. I got my degree in '68, and we separated in 1970. And then I moved upstate, New York, and I became, at that point, assistant chief psychologist in a mental hospital, and then eventually chief psychologist. And that's when I began living alone, and that's when this monastic thing started. And I,
in that, you doing psychotherapy?
Yes, I was working as a therapist.
I'm also confused about the difference between psychology and
psychotherapy. Yes. Well, psychotherapy is one branch of psychology. As a psychologist, you could do psychological testing, you could do research, you could teach, and you could do psychotherapy. So I was a psychologist, but my training was in psychotherapy. I worked a lot with disturbed children. That was my first real work. And I worked in a school, and I worked with parents. I worked with families and with children. I was always comfortable working with disturbed people, both children and then like in the mental hospital with psychotics.
Well, you set up the whole program.
Yes. Yeah, I did a lot in the hospital. So. At any rate, around that time, when my marriage was breaking up and it was moving upstate, I began to have a number of experiences that made it very clear to me that there really was a personal God. That this abstract experience that I had been having and growing towards over many, many years culminated in really knowing, yes, there is a God. And so that changed everything for me. And as I was living upstate New York,
Yeah.
let me just stop
Yeah,
here.
me.
And what happened was, without knowing what I was doing, I just began living more and more like a monk. I mean, it was not a conscious thing. I knew very little about monasticism. I read a great deal about mysticism, but I didn't know anything about monasticism. Jews don't know much about monasticism. But I began living alone. I began spending less and less time with friends. I had a lot of friends in the area. I worked very, very hard at the hospital. But when my day ended, I came home, and that was it. And I just spent a lot of time quietly. I did a lot of work on my own dreams, which were helpful at that point, because there was nobody I could dialogue with or interact with. There was nobody I knew that I felt I could talk to about what's happening. And that went on for about a year and a half, and it was a wonderful time for me. I remember. I should also mention that ever since I was a child, I had a strange Jesus thing, which is odd from a Jewish boy. I remember when I was a child, I found a New Testament, and I would kind of secretly read it at night, because my parents had been very upset. And every once in a while, I'd go to a church.
Okay.
And what time? Okay, tonight. Okay. So Jesus would kind of surface every once in a while, and then when I was at graduate school, I read a couple books about Jesus, and then I bought this huge painting of Jesus, which is a ghastly painting. It was about 4 feet by 6 feet, wood, and it was just his face, but it was like a bloody, suffering face. But it had I felt a real connection to this, and I bought it while I was still married, and while I was working on my dissertation, I took it with me. I ended up building an altar to it, and I felt there was a real power. I knew that it was of Jesus. I never thought of Jesus when I was in the presence of this painting. But there was always a Jesus thing that was kind of running through beneath the surface almost, and every once in a while it would kind of pop up its head. At any rate, I was living this way for about a year and a half, and
I hate to, we're going to run out of time.
Okay. Well, just okay. I'll move. Okay, all right. Then that's all right. All right. One thing led to another, and I began reading Thomas Merton, and I liked him very, very much. And that was the first time I came in touch with what a monastery was. And the more that I read, I said, "This is really what I'm doing. I'm living like a monastic life, and I really want to visit this place." And I was not interested in Jesus at all, but I was interested in God. So I made arrangements. This was in 1972, in the summer, to go out to Gethsemane, the Abbey of Gethsemane, which is Merton's monastery. He'd already died. And I went out there to spend a week, and when I got there, I really felt that I was home. It was a very strange feeling. And I would just spend time up in the church. I just cried. I just felt very much at home there. And I could feel a real strong presence of God during Mass. I can't account for it. That's what the fact was. So I added up 2 and 2, and I got 5. I said, well, it's obvious to me God wants me to become a monk, and obviously if I become a Catholic monk, a Trappist monk, I have to become a Catholic. So I went back to my hospital at the end of the summer, and I spoke to the Catholic chaplain, and I said I want to become Catholic, and he didn't know what to do with me. He was kind of a humble man, and here I was, a big shot in the hospital. I was Jewish, a PhD. I just came back from a week at Gethsemane, and so he said, "Here's a book, read it, and if you have any questions, I'll answer them, and then I'll baptize you." Well, I read the book, and I didn't care what the book said. This was God's will, so I was going to do it. So he baptized me in 2 weeks, and I became a Catholic. I went back to the monastery, and this time I came back as a Catholic, and the monks were very, very happy. It was his church. Well, they have to wait a year from the time you're baptized to the time you can enter. So I had a year now to play with. But there's no question this is what I was going to do. And again, I was a very odd Catholic because I had no interest in the church. Jesus was still not anyone I was interested in. I did not believe anything that the church taught. All I wanted was become a monk and be alone with God, and this was the place to do it. All right. What happened at this point was the priest who had baptized me was a member of the same religious order as Father Michael was. That's not his real name, but that's the public name we give him. And Father Michael was a psychologist who had done his internship at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center under Helen and Bill. And so he knew Helen and Bill very well, and this was while the course was being taken down. And he was one of the very, very, very few people that they shared it with. And he was very much impressed by it. He was really in awe of Helen. And Bill was like his therapist, really. And so to him the course was a perfect example of mystical writing that was very, very beautiful. We later found out that he never really read it. I mean, he had it, but he never really read it. He would read at it, never really read it. At any rate, at some point, Bill had seen that article that I had written on mysticism and schizophrenia. It was reproduced in a book. And Bill had seen it and liked the article and showed it to Michael as an example of a psychologist who took the mystical experience seriously. So he read it, Michael read it, liked it very much. And when the priest was bragging to him how he had just baptized a psychologist and told him my name, Michael got all excited, I have to meet this guy. So I called him up and we met and we became very good friends. And this was something like in October of 72. Shortly after that, I decided that I was going to leave the hospital and spend a few months on my own before I would enter the monastery. So I gave a couple of months' notice so I could, work out everything and train somebody to take my place, etc. And I felt that I should go to Israel, and I had no idea why I should do that, but that's what I was planning on doing. And so before I left, which is right after Thanksgiving, at the end of November, Michael said to me, "Before you go, there are two friends I want you to meet." This obviously were Helen and Bill. And so I did. I spent an evening with them at Bill's apartment, and it was Michael, Helen, and Bill and myself. And most of the evening was spent in telling my story. They were just interested how I ended up where I was. And at some point in the evening, someone said, it was probably Michael, that Helen had written this book on spiritual development. And that's how it was said to me. And Bill pointed in the corner of his living room where there was a stack of 7 thesis lines, very big, which was the manuscript. They offered me the opportunity of looking at it. I did not think I should look at it. I spent the evening with Michael in his apartment, and he offered it to me to look at it. And I didn't think I should look at it because I was leaving soon for Israel. I was taking nothing with me, and I couldn't see schlepping these big things with me. But all the time I was in Israel, and I ended up spending schlepping is when you haul like heavy stuff.
Oh, okay.
And you kind of schlep it. It's what it sounds like. You schlep it from one room to you just SCHLEPP. All right. It's also used as a noun for a schlep. Someone who's a schlep. All right. A schlep is somebody who's not very with it. He's kind of I don't know what to say. Fogged over. So, at any rate. At any rate, so I ended up spending five months in Israel in 2 different monasteries, and I kept thinking of this book of Helen's. I dreamt about it, etc. And I decided
that. You already looked at it.
I had not seen it.
They told you anything about it?
No, just that Helen had written it, and that it was on spirituality, or spiritual development, something like that. And I felt a real bond with Helen.
And they not told you how it was written?
No. Just that Helen had written it. That was it. No, okay. Nothing about Jesus. Nothing about subscribing. Nothing. And I felt a real connection with Helen, with Bill too, but it was more with Helen. I mean, it was deep with Helen. And so I wrote to them while I was in Israel. I dreamt about this book. Once I found it in a waste paper basket in a subway platform. The other time I found it on a beach. And both times it was a very holy book that I had found. And at that point I decided...
Were these dreams in any way similar to Helen's? When she dragged the book up from the bed of the river or something?
In one way, it wasn't... Well, in one dream I was walking on the platform, there was this big waste paper basket, very filled up, and I go over to it and there's this book. And it was like shining out of there. I mean, and I knew that was a holy book. The other time I was working on the beach, and all of a sudden I run into this book. So in that sense, it was a little similar. At that point, I had decided I would stay in Israel. I had found a monastery that was on top of a mountain. It was very, very lovely. It had no running water, no electricity. It was just perfect. I could just be quietly alone with God. It was wonderful. But I felt before I kind of nestle in there for the rest of my life, I did want to see this book, and I felt I had to do something with my parents, who were very, very upset. They thought I'd been abducted. They didn't know what was going on with their son. So I felt I had to do something with them, because I'd written to them, but obviously they weren't understanding anything. So I went back to the States, what I thought would be for 3 or 4 weeks, and that's when I saw the book, the course, for the first time. And Helen sat me in her office and Bill's office were adjacent. So Bill went into Helen's office, and Helen sat me in Bill's office for two sections of the course of the text. And I read it, and I was knocked off my feet when I saw it.
Do you remember which was the first book?
Yes, the first was "For They Have Come," chapter 26.
You read the other day.
No, I didn't read that. No, but I've read it other times. The Forgiven World is what I read. It's on the tape. Right. And the other was the very end of the text, Choose Once Again. Those are Helen's 2 favorite sections. And I read them, and I was just knocked off my feet. The language was so beautiful, number one, and it said something. It really, and that's what I said to Helen. I said, it's the first thing I've read that's as beautiful as Shakespeare, but it says something.
Which was Helen's favorite?
For They Have Come.
That was your favorite?
Well, both, yeah, but it's hers. Yes,
it
came on very quickly after that, yes. For They Have Come,
yes.
And Choose Once Again.
Choose Once Again.
So, to make a very long story short, I changed the rest of my life around together, and I decided this is what I was looking for. And I didn't have to be buried in a monastery. One of the things that always bothered me was in the back of my mind all these months I was in the monastery and thinking about it was, if I stayed in the monastery, then my skills as a psychologist would be wasted. And I knew there was something wrong with that because I was very good at what I did. And that didn't make sense that I wouldn't use it in some way. And when I saw the course and began reading it, because after I read those 2 sections I started reading it, I realized, well, this is perfect. This way all my background, my skills will be used. This course is a perfect way of integrating both psychology and spirituality. So
you just felt that you were to study this material?
I'm sorry that...
You just felt that you were to merely study the material? Or
well, I didn't. The first step was to read it. To read it, and I read it through very quickly the first time, and then after I read it, obviously much more carefully. I just knew that this was what I should be doing. I should stay in New York with Helen and Bill, and that this was my life's work. I mean, that was very clear. That's what it would be. So I changed my life around, and I did not become a monk.
Parents were relieved.
My parents were greatly relieved because they didn't have to tell anybody that I was Catholic. And I tried to explain to them that I was really not Catholic, but but it didn't show. You see, I was back in New York. I had a reputable job, so they thought, because I spent all my time up with Helen and Bill. They subsequently met Helen and Bill, and they liked them very, very much. In fact, Helen became a good friend of my mother's, and Helen and Bill were very respectable people. And so
Helen was originally Jewish.
Yeah, but she was not. Her husband Louis was very Jewish in cultural identification. Helen was not.
Do you have any idea why?
Well, her
mother was half Jewish, but she was not raised as a Jew, and so she had no Jewish feeling.
Any theory as to why?
Absolutely none.
Jews seem to have
absolutely
such a
none.
big influence in that.
No, absolutely not. I mean, yes, it is a fact.
I could say Marianne Williamson.
Yes, you could say.
No.
The person who printed the course was Jewish, yes. And in fact, they used to call Bill our token WASP.
Yeah.
Because he was doing. You know what a WASP is?
Yeah.
White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Yes. But yes, it was very odd. But I don't have a clue. I mean, people have all kind of mystical ideas about Jews and the sign of David and all this stuff. Who knows? But it is a fact that a large number of Jews, especially at the beginning, were involved with the course. Or a large number of people involved with the course were Jewish.
So you started working with Helen?
Yes, and then after I read it through the first time, I said to Helen and Bill that I thought that it needed a little editing, that there was material, some of the personal material, which had been taken out. Most of it had been taken out. There were still some things I felt did not belong. Mm-hmm. The paragraphing that they had done, and the sectioning, and the chapters and the titles were not very good. They were inconsistent. So Bill was not good at that.
Had they just done that themselves?
They had done that. No, they had done that
through
themselves.
guidance?
No. That was not on the guidance. No, the text came straight through, and so they arbitrarily just. I mean, a lot of the dictation for a day ended at a natural pause, which was the end of a section, a chapter. So it was not that difficult. But there were a lot of decisions that they made that I felt were a little arbitrary. But they were the ones who did that. That was not the channel dictated to Helen. And they were told to take out all the personal material, which they basically did, but there were still some things that didn't quite fit and whatever. So anyway, I said to Helen and Bill, I thought it should be gone over again. And Bill was not the kind of person who had patience for that. That was not his skill. But I did. So Helen and I did that. And we spent the next year, 14 months somehow.
Under guidance. Right.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Anything. Well, yes. Anything that was a problem, Helen always asked about.
So how would that work? You look at a sentence and that doesn't...
Well, we didn't edit it. We didn't change anything, except at the beginning, where things were taken out. In other words, the early months, or especially weeks, the personal material was woven into the specific messages Jesus was giving Helen. It was like woven in, and so when you took out the personal, there were like gaps, and so that's where we had to fill in a phrase or something. I mean, it was not that we wrote sentences. And this was only like in now the first four chapters. After that, the editing was more in terms of punctuation, paragraphing, titles, capitalization,
And the headings.
And the headings. Helen and Bill had done that at the beginning. Then I went over that with Helen, and whenever when there'd be something that was we weren't sure about, Helen would always ask. There were a couple of sections I remember saying, "This is not a good title," and she would ask Jesus, and her answer was, "No, this is what it should be." So.
But you didn't say, by the way, 2 pages back there was something you didn't. I didn't like that.
No, actually, Helen's experience was Jesus didn't really care about the titles and the paragraphing, capitalization. I mean so she felt that was up to her, and so we did it as prayerfully as we could. But nothing was done that had any effect on the substance of it. I mean that we would never change. Helen was very clear about
Something
it.
I've never heard you talk about before is how. What was the impact of this material on you personally, on your own spiritual path? Did you in any way resist it? Was it?
No, I didn't.
Revelation to you?
It was, well, I never seen anything
Find
like
it disturbing in any way?
No, actually I didn't. I read it, and it was like I knew everything in it was true, and I understood it. Now, part of that was my background as a psychologist, and having read a lot of Freud, it made perfect sense, all the kind of the subtle psychological things. The idea that the world was an illusion, I was fine with that. I never thought about it very much, but I'd read a lot of Hinduism and Buddhism, and I knew that was true. So I had no trouble intellectually with it, and I had no trouble personally with it. It was a little odd in a way. Helen had asked Jesus at one point, I remember why it was that I had no trouble with this or something. And his answer was, but there wasn't any time for it. It was like there was so much to do that if I was struggling with this, it wouldn't be done. Or something like that. I don't know. For what it's worth, that was the answer. But no, it was not. It was more that I had found what it was. I was a real seeker, during that part of my life. I thought I'd found the answer in the monastery, but obviously it was not a good fit. Again, my psychological background was not going to be used at all, and I was not a believing Christian. I mean, Jesus at this point actually became very central to me. I left that part out. That was very important for me. And I realized that what I had called God the last 2 or 3 years was not God, it was really Jesus. That this personal experience I felt of God was not God, it was really Jesus. So, but I was not a real Christian. I certainly was not Catholic. So the idea of being in a monastery, while at the time was not a problem for me because I just didn't deal with it. Nobody asked me about it. I mean, I was obviously a very sincerely religious person, so nobody bothered to ask me questions.
Well, they asked you one question.
Yeah, the one question I was asked by 2 priests at different times was, did I have any trouble with the virgin birth? And I didn't. It was irrelevant to me, but I didn't have trouble.
You have
So-
trouble. It was irrelevant. You just said you didn't have any trouble.
Right, I didn't have any trouble with that. So that the course was like, in a sense, this was the obvious next step for me, and the material just seemed just absolutely right, and it was perfect. I knew what it said. I knew that it was right, and it was never a question for me. It was just, and then it was
Talk a little bit about Helen. It's not really an interview with Helen, but
Yeah.
I think everyone's always interested in the kind of person she was, and you know her sort of response to this material.
Yeah, well,
she resented in some way.
Yeah, my book was really written in large part to really get the record straight about Helen. So many stories about her that she was an atheist, she didn't believe in this, or that were just not true, and I kind of explained that in the book. She obviously was an example of someone who was very, very split. She deeply identified with the Course and believed in it. I mean, there was never any question about that. She resisted it. There was never any question about that. There's no question that Jesus was the central figure for her. She spent a lifetime running away from him, yelling at him, arguing with him. But when all was said and done, he was the central person for her. And it was very clear to me her devotion to him, her love for him, and her anger at him. And they all coexisted. I mean, that was the thing about Helen. She's a very hard person to describe because you have to know her. I mean, she was odd. She had impeccable integrity. And in editing the Course with her, that was very, very clear. I mean, she knew this was holy. She knew that it came from Jesus and that it should be kept as pure as possible, and she got herself out of the way. You know, she felt she was okay to mess with the form a little bit, the capitalization, the punctuation, the paragraphing, that kind of stuff, but not with the content.
Did you keep this anger to her day?
Yes. In the last period of her life, it became not anger anymore. It was just like resignation. It was just she just kind of basically just kind of kept Jesus off, kept him away from her that way. But then,
so the Course was no help to her.
I don't think Helen needed the Course. That was one of the things that was clear. It was like she knew what the Course said inside and out. In fact, I've written about it. It was very odd. The first teaching I ever did with the Course was to Helen. I mean, we would read through, so we read through every line. And we would read something, and Helen would start to laugh, and she had a very good sense of humor. She'd start to laugh, and tears would come out of her face. She'd laughing so hard. She said, I don't understand a word of this. This sounds absolute nonsense to me. So I would have to explain to her, knowing full well that somewhere she knew very well what it said. And I had to explain to her what it said. You know.
The application of the principles.
She could not, yes, but she could when she chose to. But she most of the time did not choose to. But she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she was holding on to these grievances. She knew this was the exact opposite of what the Course said. She knew this would not work, but she did it. And she
was also very helpful to many people.
Yes, she helped. There were hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, probably thousands that she helped. Before the Course, during the Course, while the Course was coming through her, and afterwards. She was very helpful. She did not usually like the people that she helped. She resented the fact she would have to help them. But she was very, very dedicated to helping people.
In what way did she help them?
Gave them advice. She was she was not a psychotherapist in the usual sense of the word. She would just tell people what the problem was and say, fix it.
I read this book, I've chapel.
No, she never did that. No, she would never do that. No, she would give them no. She would give advice. Very often I would be with her when she was giving people advice, very good advice based on the Course. And the person would leave and I'd say to Helen, did you listen to what you said? And she would laugh and say, no, I didn't hear a word of it. It was true. She just So her advice was very good. She was very, very specific about helping people heal relationships. About people healing relationships, especially with family members, spouses, friends, parents, children. That was a big, big thing for us.
And she worked with.
Yes, she worked with retarded children. She did not actually work with the children. She worked with the parents of retarded children. Yeah.
Is there anything more you want to say about the work you did with her?
No,
So at what stage did you feel that you were ready to go out there and start teaching? I assume that was...
I didn't...
the course published first?
I was not interested in being a teacher. I was not interested in... I always saw my role as teaching teachers of the course, like small groups. I did not think... None of us thought this course would become as big. Nobody would ever dream that there'd be a newsletter in London, for example. So we had no idea this would happen. We had talked about having a place where Helen, Bill, and I would live, and Helen's husband Louis would live. But it became clear after a while, and teach, live there and teach. And it became clear after a while that this would never happen. And when we met Judy Scutch, then maybe Judy would be part of this. But it was obvious this would never happen.
Well, Bill never wanted a teaching role.
Bill never wanted to teach, and Bill and Helen never healed their relationship. I mean, that was the other thing.
On the surface.
On the surface. I mean, in terms of what anybody would know, or how they felt about each other, was never healed. I mean, there was obviously a deep bond there.
Before Bill died, he thought
Before Bill died, he felt that he had resolved it and had forgiven Helen. Maybe he did. Helen already had been dead 7 years. But certainly while they were both alive, this was not healed. And the idea of their doing anything together became out of the question, became clear. I was not interested in teaching.
Bill was very shy, too. Mm-hmm. So he was kind of reticent, and he did not want to take a position like out there.
Yeah. So did you think it was out?
Yeah, so I had no thoughts. While Helen was still alive, I wrote my first book, which was the pamphlet Christian Psychology and A Course in Miracles. And I had thoughts of another book, actually. While Helen was alive, I started working on the glossary, and then something which later ended up to be Forgiveness in Jesus. But I had no thought of doing a lot of writing or teaching. I would give talks to groups at varying times, even while Helen was alive. But while Helen was alive, I devoted all my time to her, really. When Helen died, I still had no interest in teaching. Gloria and I were married in the fall of '81.
Did you have an income from somewhere?
I had by that time my income was I had a private practice. I was seeing people.
So I should turn to Gloria now.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
On her side.
Yes.
Well,
okay.
mine's a long story. If you're running short on time, you make
Let's
mine.
turn the tape over.
Okay, I was born and brought up a Catholic, Roman Catholic, and my mother was very religious. I did not go to Catholic school, but I went to release time twice a week. And I wanted to be a nun. And then after I graduated 8th grade, my mother, her family was in Italy, so we went for a visit, and she got a series of heart attacks, so we stayed for a year. And during that time, I found out what World War II had wrought on all the people there. All the bombings and the rapings and all this kind of stuff that people experienced firsthand. And what it did to me was it traumatized me. I mean, at that point, of course, I was too young to understand, but I was very severely traumatized, thinking, how could a God allow this to happen? The God, that I knew and whatnot. And I decided that I just didn't want a God. Like, what kind of God was this that allowed this to happen, that created this world? So I just signed off, in a sense. And when I went back to the States, I went to see the priest that I knew in the parish, and they told me to go to. They had some Jesuits there that were doing what was it called when they would do things for a week?
Retreats?
Yeah, retreat and that kind of thing. And I told the priest, I really don't believe. And he would say, oh, well, see that blade of grass, and you have to believe in faith. And I didn't have it. So I just left. I left the church. My mother was very upset. And I never went back to church. But I searched all through high school. I read different, books on spirituality and other religions, and I searched. But nothing seemed to quite make sense to me.
So you were looking for something that...
I was looking all my life, because this whole world never made sense to me. Nothing made sense to me. I went to college and whatnot, and I still searched, and I found no answers. And I wanted to become a Rosicrucian, but my parents didn't let me. and because I thought maybe I'll find an answer there. But I got married. I went to live in Iran. My ex-husband was Iranian. I had 2 children, and etc. Came back to the States. Was teaching. I was taught over there, and I taught here. And I still didn't. There was like this missing gap, And I always felt a deep connection with Mary. Mary was always an important figure for me. And Jesus was kind of in the background, but Mary was like more important. And I just was in a very special hate relationship with God because I blamed him for the whole mess of the world and everything that was going on. And one day somebody said to me that she had gone to a psychic, which I didn't even know, in my department, one of my colleagues, and said, why don't you try it? It's interesting. It's an experience. So I was open-minded. I said, fine. So I went. And the guide of this person who was doing the reading said, you should go to Wainwright House. You'll find what you've been looking for all your life. Now, I found it very intriguing because what have I been looking for? I wonder what.
Wainwright House, you should explain.
Well, Wainwright House is like a New Age center. Okay, I didn't know it at that time. I didn't know anything. So I called up. I looked in the phone book. There was a Wainwright House. I was kind of baffled by the whole thing now, and very intrigued. And I registered for some symposium and workshops they were having on healing and whatnot. And I thought, well, it sounds interesting. Let me explore it. So I went, and when I went to register at the desk, they said, well, there's this, and this. And I said, oh, Course in Miracles, that sounds interesting. So I registered for that, and that's how I got the course. I listened, and it was a person that right now doesn't live in New York anymore. It's Bruce Gregory, and I didn't have the money that first night for the course, and I hadn't taken my.
What did you think it was about? Presumably, like.
Well, he was talking about forgiveness.
Oh, no, but when you just read the title.
A Course in Miracles,
what it is about.
I didn't know, but I didn't know what it was about, A Course in Miracles. But I went to listen to the lecture, and I talked to him, and questioned. And he was talking about basically forgiveness and things of that, how you forgive. And so I thought it was very, very interesting. And I said, I need those books tonight before I come back tomorrow, because it was a weekend. I said, but I don't have any money with me. I forgot my checkbook. But here's my license, my driver's license. He said, I don't need that. I trust you. And he let me take the books.
That's unusual in New York.
Yes, very unusual. And I got home that night. I stayed up half the night, and I started reading. And it was like lightning bolts going right through me when I did feel like it was the voice of Jesus almost reading it to me at the table. And when it said God did not create this world, it was like the whole puzzle of life or whatnot came together. And I realized, well, that's the beginning of my healing with God. Because if he didn't create the world and the body and everything, well, I mean, so it was like eureka. It was a eureka point. And so then I thought, oh, this material is so important, I have to start a group in my house. I called up all my friends, and I said, let's meet Thursday night. And so they said, I said, bring anybody you want to, and I started a group in my house. And that's how my life at the Course started. So.
Well, these were your friends. These weren't Course people.
No. This was friends, and I said, bring anybody you want to. This is a very interesting, series of books, and I think, you might not want to come after the first time, but I think you should listen to, what this has to say. So that's how it started, and I started the group once a week in the house. That was I think it was the end of 77, the beginning of 77, yeah.
And then when did you meet Ken?
I met Kenneth, actually, I didn't meet him personally. He was speaking at the Barbizon Plaza. There was a...
Well, I'm interested.
Yeah, he was... He was speaking at the Barbizon Plaza. When was that? In June, I guess, and I had just gotten the course in that winter, January or so. So... And there was a whole, everybody was on stage. Bill Thetford, at that point, I didn't know anybody. Judy and Jerry and Kath and but Helen wasn't there, but everybody else. And everybody was talking. And when he got up to talk, and I don't usually see auras or try to, it was all of a sudden I saw this huge aura on a stage. It was like all white all around him. And I thought, whoa. I said, that's really interesting. And I didn't even know what that was about. So I didn't say anything to him, about that. But I asked, was it the first time I asked you the question? No, the second time. So he was gone that afternoon. I was going to ask him some questions because they were going to break up into groups in the afternoon, and he was gone. So I said, oh, okay. So that was the first time. The second time was a year later. Same conference, second conference. And by that time, we had a lot of problems in our group because it was such it was eclectic. I mean, we had from you can name it, every spiritual path was practically represented in that group. And the Roman Catholics were having a very hard time with this. So, and they kept saying, no, this means, that's transubstantiation, and they were going on, and this is, I said, oh, no, I don't think it means that. I really don't. So, he was walking up the aisle after he spoke, and I stopped him, and I said, I have to ask you a question about transubstantiation. So, he looked at me like, he says, well, I don't have time right now. He said, I'm in the phone book. Why don't you call me?
Can we define transubstantiation?
Well, that's transubstantiation in the Roman Catholic Church is when the bread and the wine become the body and blood of Jesus. And they were trying to fit this kind of doctrine and belief in with the Course. And I was trying to show that can't be. And so, it was getting very hot and heavy in the group. So I thought, oh, I'm not going to call him. That's ridiculous. So I didn't. And then there was a meeting about a month or two later up in Westchester, where I lived, in the, I forgot the name of the group. What was the name of the group? Do you remember?
Foundation for Religion and Mental Health.
Right. And he was speaking in the afternoon, and I thought, well, let me go, and maybe I can get this question answered, and a few others that had popped up by then. So I went. And he remembered me, and he said, oh, it was very crowded. People were wheeling all around him. He said, I don't think we're going to have time to really discuss this. Why don't you call me? So he said it again. And I thought, I'm not going to call him. I was very annoyed. So I didn't. And then a third time that year, about maybe another month later, they were having a meeting up in the Saugerties on the other side of the Catskills for facilitators and of the course. And so I went. And I went specifically because I knew he was going to be speaking on Sunday. And so when he came in, he says, oh, there's my Catholic girlfriend. I'll never forget. And I thought, oh, I'm not Catholic. He should only know, because I asked him a Catholic question. Well, anyway, so when he got finished speaking, we were going to lunch across the field, and I finally got to ask him, and I got answers to different questions. And I said, I think if you could, I said, it'd be nice if you could come to my group, because there's a lot of quarreling over different things, and it seems to be that, we can't resolve this because everybody has their own way of looking at it, interpretation. So, and then I asked him two questions at the table. I said, I have a fear of heights and a fear of snakes. And this is what we were already at lunch. And I said, I can't seem to, overcome it. I've tried different things. So he said, well, this is why you're afraid of snakes. This is why you're afraid of heights, but that's not really what you're afraid of. And I looked at him, and he said, you're really running away from Jesus, you're afraid of. Well, it was like somebody turned a faucet on. Out of nowhere, I started to cry. I couldn't stop crying at this dinner table. I mean, this huge table, everybody's sitting there. I just got up, and I went to pack, because it was Sunday afternoon, we were leaving. And my girlfriend got so angry at me, I cried all the way home. And then I knew I'd better call him, because I couldn't stop crying at all. And that's how we got to know one another. And then he came to my group, and one thing led to another. And that's the romance.
But then you started teaching together.
Yes. Well, he would come to my group. That was before we were married. And then it wasn't until we were married in 1981 that we started working together in terms of that. Not before then.
So back to Ken. What were you in this time? You started teaching. You were traveling around.
No. I really didn't do much of that. And actually, Gloria's group was one exception, because I was asked to kind of speak to a lot of groups, and I didn't want to do that.
Before looking after Helen.
Helen had died in February of '81.
Yeah, we got married September '81.
Yeah, but I already knew Gloria. But I didn't. Number one, I didn't want to do a lot of traveling, and number two, the groups were a little funny, and I didn't want to just go to groups and get here and do a lot of things that I felt were not helpful, and hear a lot of things that weren't helpful. But Gloria, I knew was serious, and that she. So that I made an exception with that group. I think a couple other groups I would.
Well, it's very interesting, because I can't tell you what he really said the first time he came, because it was really World War III was about to break out in this group. But everybody felt like their questions had been answered, or and it was very peaceful, and it was very odd. I can't tell you exactly why, but that was the end product in my group.
What happened, though, in terms of the teaching, was that we had gone out to visit Judy Scotch, and we were going to be there for, I guess, a while or something. And Judy was supposed to speak in Oregon, in Washington, right?
Oh, well, after we got married, yes.
There was a big miracles conference.
That's
there,
right, up in
the mountains. And,
in the Cascade.
So she and Bob Scotch were going to go speak. Whit was going up there. They were all going up there. And so she said, "Why don't you just come?" So Gloria and I went. And the first evening, Judy was kind of, and I was not on the schedule to speak. I was interested in speaking. And the first evening, Judy was speaking and telling kind of the story of how the course was written and all that. And then she finally said, "I'm not the one who should answer your questions. Here's the person who should." So she asked me to come up. So I spoke a bit. I spoke a while, and then they asked me if I would give a talk the next day. And that talk was what you watched yesterday, the one it says. And that was in '82, I think, whenever that was. And actually, that was the first real time that I spoke to a large group about the course. And certainly not...
So you're actually speaking to a brick wall.
Well, yes, so I explained to you.
Yeah, right.
What happened, right.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
But anyway...
We've missed out a whole chunk, haven't we? We've missed out all the publications you've got coming.
Oh, yes, but that's...
The funding for the...
So should I go back to that?
If you
I'll do it quickly. I'll do it very quickly.
Yeah.
All right. Helen and I finished the editing in the early part of '75, and I felt as though the time was going near that we really should get on with it. I mean, Helen was stalling, and this would make her very anxious. So it took over a year. It should have taken 6 months. I think it took well over a year, and I kept pushing her, and I think we really should get this done. Anyway, we finally did. The whole thing had to be retyped, had to be proofread, which it was, but not very well. That's where there were mistakes. And finally we got the whole thing ready. Huh?
Who did the proofreading?
Well, I did, Bill did, but we didn't proofread it with each other against, Helen wanted that. Helen said, if you're going to proof, you have to do it right. Bill didn't want to do that. And so we didn't do it. But we should have.
Well, no one could read her shorthand either. Only she could. You were the only one, yeah.
But at any rate, we got it finished, and it was all typed and finished in the early part of the early spring of '75, and we didn't know why. And it was shortly after that Judy appeared, and that was also kind of strange circumstances. She was speaking at a conference in New York, and Bill went to it, and he hadn't really wanted to go to it, but he thought he should go. He went to it, and so he and Judy met, and Judy at that point was interested in funding research on healing and psychic phenomenon, and Bill was interested in that, and one thing led to another, and Bill invited her to come up to the medical center to talk about this issue, and so she did with Douglas Dean. I don't know if you're familiar with Douglas Dean. He's an elderly man now. He was very prominent. He was a physicist and very, very prominent in kind of psychic stuff. And so he and Judy came up to the medical center. I guess it was April. I guess Judy always knows the date, April or May or something of '75. And so she and Douglas had lunch with Helen and Bill, and then came back to the office, and I was there, so we were all there. And that's when we told you about the course. and Helen told a little about the story, how it came, and Judy was kind of knocked off her feet. Took the manuscript back. He took the manuscript back with her, and we all became very friendly, and we used to meet once a week, twice a week at Judy's apartment. We went out to the West Coast in the summer of '75, which was basically the coming out of the course, and that was the first time Helen and Bill spoke publicly, and it was easier for them to speak publicly 3,000 miles away from home.
Now I thought Helen's name wasn't associated with the course until after her death.
No. Well, it was not associated in print, but she spoke, and it was always very cute. I used to speak of it as like our vaudeville show. Helen would speak about her experiences. Bill would speak, and they would both speak about this strange voice. And then my part of the show was to come on and say, by the way, you should know that this voice that Helen and Bill were talking about was Jesus, because they couldn't say the word. So that was my part.
You got the wrong tomato.
Right. So anyway, and at some point we began talking about the need to publish it, and we spoke to a vice president of Simon & Schuster, a big publishing house, and he was very interested. I think he even came with a contract or another deal, but nothing felt right. And whenever we would ask about it, the answer was always no, we shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that stuff. Some other people came along, and finally Helen heard the answer that we should do it ourselves. And so Judy and Bob Scotcher, that husband, had a foundation which they were using to again fund research on psychic phenomenon and healing. It was called the Foundation for Parasensory Investigation. So that was the foundation. We changed its name to Foundation for Inner Peace, and there wasn't any money for it. And Judy got a call. I forget exactly when, but around that time. And this person said, I've heard about the course, and it seems to me it's the most important thing in the world, and I want to pay for it. So he basically wrote a blank check.
What was this guy's name?
His name was Reed Erickson, and he was living in Mexico.
Was that R-E-I-D?
R-E-E-D. Erickson, E-R-I-K-S-O-N, I think.
I don't remember.
And he had a foundation, and he had made money, I think, in shipbuilding or something with boats. Anyway, so he basically wrote a blank check, in a sense, for the first printing. So.
How many were printed?
5,000. And we were correcting the proofs as they were coming off the printing press. It was a disaster. And there were a lot of mistakes. But anyway, it was done.
And that was the start. And the sales of those funded the next.
I'm sorry?
Next printing. The
Yes.
sales of those funded the next.
Yes. The sales of those funded the next printing, and then and actually, I should say, in '75, when we first went out to the West Coast, Judy had a friend who had a small publishing house, very small, and she did 300 photo offsets, like Xerox copies of the original, of the manuscript, the edited manuscript. And those were the ones that were distributed. Helen, up until that point, would let nobody have it. She was very, very protective of it. And she allowed there to be 300 of these. So, but then a year later, we printed out 5,000, and those sold out, I think, well within a year, and then we printed more, and and the sales of that funded the next printing. I mean, that's how it went.
What was next? The idea for this foundation?
I guess. Anyway, but that
Well,
was
we started, what we did is after we got married, we turned a one-car garage into like a classroom. But it was busting at the seams. I mean, we could hardly fit everybody in there. So then we decided that we need a bigger place. This is not going to work.
Well, but before that was actually starting the foundation.
Right.
I've always been on the executive board of the Foundation for Inner Peace, but they were on the West Coast, we were on the East Coast, and it seemed much easier just to have a separate organization. So we began it in '82,
Right.
The end of '82, and actually the papers came through in January of '83 for the foundation. But during that, you can see the story.
Right. Well, I mean, and you were still working on the glossary and forgiveness in Jesus, and we didn't have a computer there, so it was all.
Why did you feel that a foundation for teaching the course was necessary?
It was something that Helen and I always had spoken about. It was like right from the beginning. In fact, Helen had seen a house, a big house near water, and with a wooden door, and the door said foundation, something, and had a piece at the end, but teaching was there somewhere, I forget. And we always, again, as I said earlier, we had talked about this should be some kind of school, but we'd seen Helen, Bill, Louie, and I there, but the form was always very unclear. And then it became clear that this would not happen. But there was always some idea of teaching, and that I would be the teacher, and it was really like teaching teachers. That was how we saw it. We never envisioned anything big like this. We didn't see the courses being done that widespread. So, but there was always something about teaching.
Well, and the course lends itself to that because, I mean, having been a teacher all my life, it's curriculum. You know, it's a text, a workbook, and a manual for teachers. So it's geared that way.
And it was always clear. Helen, you probably heard the famous line. She would always say that this was for 5 or 6 people. You know, that's what she said. That's what she always used to say. Yes, she would say this is for 5 or 6 people. And at one point she saw a boat with a flag and it had 6 stars on it. Then a little later it had 10 stars on it.
But you felt that you were the ones to take on this teaching role?
Yes. This was clear to me even before I met Gloria. This was while Helen was still alive. The form was always unclear, and I'm not really a public person. I may do a lot of public speaking, but I'm basically kind of monk-like in terms of how I live, in terms of just wanting not a lot of people around. So I never envisioned anything like this, but it was always clear that the course needed teaching, and that was what I was supposed to do, and that Helen was not going to do that. Bill did not like to do it, and I was going to do it. And so that was it.
So
you outgrew
we outgrew the one-car garage, and then it's very interesting how the money came for the next place. You want to go into that?
Bob, you mean?
Yeah.
I had a patient who was a priest, and then became an ex-priest, and he knew about the course, but he was really not that interested in it. But he ended up marrying a nun, as many ex-priests do. Married an ex-nun. Anyway, it ended up that he had grown up with this person, Bob Draper, who now lived in San Diego, but they had gone to school together and they'd grown up together. And he was out in the West Coast visiting and something, and I guess he brought his wife out there, but he met Bob, I guess Kathy, I guess they were married then.
Yes.
And he told Bob about this book and about me. And so Bob got the book, started writing to me and asking questions, and we became kind of friends, correspondence-wise. And then he and Kathy heard me speak in Tucson, I guess, in '82.
That was your father died.
Right. And he died in '82.
You were going to do a weekend workshop, and you had to cut it because your
my
father just
died. So then I had to cancel the workshop, and they pleaded with me, can I at least just fly out and just do one day? So I was able to do that. So I did that. So Bob and Kathy were there, and so I met them. And anyway, shortly after that, Bob called me up and said that they felt that they should give us money. And so they gave us $100,000 or $200,000, which enabled us to buy this place in Crown Point.
Which was the next place we went to, and that was much larger, and we had office space in the basement, and we had 2 basically huge rooms where we could have classes. And then we outgrew that. So the next thing, we were looking for, Bob said, well, why don't you look for another place, Bob and Kathy, and we will fund the buildings. So we looked and looked and looked, lots of places, try to get some former monasteries that have been closed and whatnot, but nothing seemed to work out. And then one day, a friend of ours who lived in Michigan called up and said, he had heard that there was a place in New York and whatnot, and he said he'll fly out. And he did, and we came up here and saw this place, and we thought, well...
That's the short version of a long story.
Right. Very short version.
Right.
And we saw it on December 8th, which to me was significant because that's the Immaculate Conception. even though I don't believe in an Immaculate Conception, but it was a
Catholic holiday.
It's a Catholic.
Mary.
Mary. And, well, the place was in terrible shape, but we looked through and we thought, well, this is probably the place. And
It felt right.
it felt right somehow.
Isn't it very much like the vision of the light? Was it the white building? Wasn't the lighthouse?
No, Helen had seen, but that was clearly a symbol. I mean, it did
Yeah.
well. But yes, but it was a white building with a cross on top.
And so we called up Bob and Kathy and spoke to them, and they gave us the money, and we closed on it in January. So that's basically how we got up here.
How do you build accommodation for students?
Well, we redid all the buildings are in very bad shape, so we had to do the inside and outside over, and we put in kitchens every place that there weren't kitchens, and we put those 2 buildings up that are in blue there, and the Galilee 1 and 2, and put heat every place there was no heat, and remodeled and fixed up everything from the foundations all the way up, re-roofed, etc.
And to summarize what you do here, you have classes,
Yes,
seminars, people come for
Retreats.
retreats.
private study as well as, so that you can just come and study and have no contact with anyone else if you
Yes, yes.
If you want to, yes.
So
And then
it's
this
quite
year we
nice.
introduced contemplative weeks, which we never had before. What we had before was, workshops, academy classes, and intensives that lasted, 2 or 3 weeks. Last year we had a class 6 weeks, academy class. So we experiment with different forms as we go along. And we felt an urge this year to put in something about contemplative weeks, which we never did. So that's how that came about.
And you're working on the translations here currently.
He is.
Yes.
I only come in for the Italian.
Yes.
How many have we done so far?
I think there are 4 done, the German, Spanish, Portuguese, and Hebrew. The Chinese should be out this year. The Russian should be finished this year. It should be out probably early next year.
The French.
The French has to be redone. The Spanish actually has to be totally revised, so that's in process now. The Danish will be done. The Dutch will be done next year. The Danish probably a year or 2 after that. I mean, they go on and on and on.
Yeah. Dutch is coming out in November next year.
Okay, so I'd like to get personal again. Just looking back, I'll start with Kenneth, to your early life, comparing that with now, what do you think that you've gained from your association study with the course? What way are you different as a person?
Oh, well, certainly externally, I'm much.
What's the gift to you?
Yes, I think I was always aware, even as a child, that there was more to us than to what was going on. And, even though I had a relatively happy childhood, had a lot of friends, and I did a lot of things I liked, I always felt that I wasn't a part of things. It was kind of just like a marginal aspect to it. And I think what this has done is made everything kind of clear in terms of my life and the meaning of life, the meaning of my life. So that I never really had a purpose. I think that the purpose for a good part of my life was purely internal, was to really get in touch with this thing inside of myself, which I ended up calling God, and realized was God. But it was always internal, in a way, and I always had trouble in integrating that, as I mentioned before. And I think this has enabled me to integrate that and become somehow realize that the inner and outer are one, and that one doesn't have to sacrifice God by being involved with people, and one doesn't have to be with people and sacrifice God. I think that was probably the most important thing for me, which was a struggle for me in kind of my early years, like 20s and stuff. Like I didn't know how to do that, and I think this is so. In that sense, it's made me a whole person.
So in a way, my question misses the point, doesn't it? Because it's not about how it's changed you as a person at all. That's not what the course is about.
No, it's changed me only in the sense that I now feel whole. And I think in my early years, there were things missing, and I didn't know how to, or there were things that were there, but they weren't together. There was this and that. I didn't quite know how to make it all fit together. And the course did that. both in terms of theory, but also in terms of my own personal life. So, in a sense, I think I would say more integrated, more whole. And obviously, if I hadn't met the course, I wouldn't have met Gloria. So, that's
biggest good.
That's indeed.
Okay. Well, if I had to ask you the same question, Gloria,
Well,
what difference has it made?
I think it made all the difference in the world.
What you're supposed to say is you met your loving husband.
Before I saw you, okay, before I saw you. I think it started the healing with my concept of God and projecting onto God all kinds of things, being really angry at him. So that's how, it started that first night. And I think it's continued presence in my life. I think I can't even imagine my life without the Course. It was like it pulled together. If you want to use the metaphor of a puzzle, pieces were all over the place, and it kind of just integrated the whole thing and brought it together. So in one, and then of course meeting Kenneth was very important, and I was the one, unfortunately, that felt we should start a foundation. I kept getting this feeling, meditate and whatnot, and I finally told him. And so I wasn't sure exactly, but I knew that this was very important work, and that I knew that from the beginning, that first night.
Is your role with the foundation or the day-to-day running of it? I know you teach as well.
Yes, basically.
I love what
I'm sorry.
in the on the coffee table in the lodge. There's a Love and Forgiveness magazine. It was an interview there, and I read part of it.
Yes.
And you're talking about how the day-to-day running of the foundation, how you have problems like anybody else.
Oh yes.
And you say, well, why not? This world's never going to be perfect.
Right.
And so the thing is how you handle those problems.
Well,
People think it's strange that you have problems in a holy place like that.
yeah,
And
well,
I thought when I started the Miracle Network, I was just going to be, the Holy Spirit was going to sort of guide me through absolutely everything.
And this is the point.
It was all going to be smooth running, and all the miracles were going to happen all over the place.
well, I think that
I wasn't prepared for the hassles and the
tremendous.
hard work and
Yes.
the stress and
Yes. Well,
attacks and everything.
right. For 10 years, we were here 10 years this June. We moved up here. We closed in January, but we moved up in June. And I think probably the greatest learning has occurred because we had 2 contractors default. So there was a lot of forgiveness and, all kinds of things, that buildings that should have been, finished, or work that should have been that never got done, and defaulting, and, all that kind of thing. So for me, it's been like one lesson after another, in a sense, and it's always been with relationships. Very, very strange, but it's always with people, relationships, contractors, builder, engineers, this, that, and the other thing. So that's what we've had for 10 years here, basically. A lot of that, and like you say, you don't realize. If I knew what I know now, then I would have probably said that's a very nice place up here, and I'm not doing this, because it's been very.
Have you had this experience that people seem to get when they start studying the course? The problems seem to get worse. There's that whole thing about maybe begin to uncover some of the unconscious guilt.
Right. Yeah.
Was that your experience?
Well, certainly here, in terms of the place,
Yes.
there was one major problem after another the
Yes.
early years. Now things run very smoothly. Problems, but we had a septic system failed, the pump failed, that gave it.
Well, we had to put a septic system in. There wasn't one.
But then it would fail, and then the roofs leaking, and
Pipes
power going,
bursting.
there's all the things that you'd imagine. It's just a huge place.
Before that, you had an easy life.
It was much simpler.
Well, we didn't have we have 9 buildings here, we didn't have that kind of thing, even in Crampon, which was bigger. There was only 3 buildings there, and so we didn't have this kind of problem. And we were not trained to be contractors or, engineers or do anything with building. His professional training was psychologist, mine was being a teacher. So this was all new to me, and I had to catch up on a lot of, and read up and study things which I didn't know. So it was quite a learning experience. Yeah. And a lot of stress,
We do have a staff, actually. Most of the staff has been with us for a long time, so I think the staff really
I have
works
tremendous
well.
admiration for what you've done. I've just had a small taste of this.
Yeah,
It's fantastic.
it's been hard. I found it difficult, at least, very much the application.
Do you feel, I get the impression that you feel you're on a mission to explain the course to the misguided. in the UK a few years ago, there was a new TV station that set up. This was their slogan, a mission to explain. Was they thought the people don't want this sort of sugar-coated, easy TV. We're going to. This is a breakfast time. We're going to sit down and explain what the issues are. And of course, nobody watched. Nobody was interested.
Well, it was the wrong time, maybe,
they
breakfast
wanted their
time.
froth.
Maybe they need it at 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah. So I got this mission to explain
Right.
the slogan.
I don't know if I would say it like that, but I'm not sure I would even use the word mission, but I do feel, in terms of myself, and Gloria could speak for herself, but I think that our purpose really is to see to, I think, that by the time we leave and die, that the course will have a solid foundation, little f. And that, and the course certainly does stand on its own. But just as like you have a little tree that begins to grow, you have to kind of nourish it, and you have to see to it that it's protected, otherwise it won't grow. In a sense, I think that we see our work as being to ensure that the course grows the way it's supposed to go, however that is.
You don't think it's got that firm foundation with a small f? Yeah.
I don't think so. I think it's so easily misunderstood. And as over the years, much to our surprise, as we said before, the course has become very, very well known. Very, very well known. I think it's become even more prone to misunderstanding. Not that that's a sin. I mean, people do whatever and they misunderstand whatever. And I don't think I have felt on a conscious level, this is what I'm supposed to do. I just do it. And then I look back at what I'm doing and say, oh, that's why I'm doing it. Just like when I write a book, I have no idea the way the book is going to turn. I just do the book. And then when it's over, I say, oh, yeah, sure, that's what the book's about. So I start a book, I think it has one purpose, so it's going to be one thing, and then it ends up totally different. And I think with my own work, it's the same thing. Like when I first gave that talk in Washington that you saw the tape on, this was not, I think, consciously chosen. It ended up, actually, it was Judy's idea that I do it at the last minute. But it led to one thing after another, and it became very clear as I began to do it how much misunderstanding there was of the course. And I personally do not care whether people hear what I say or agree with what I say. I just feel this is what I do, so I do it. And again, looking back on it, I see this is why it seems as if I'm doing it. So that, again, when we both die, that there will be a solid core of teaching that's there. What people do, they do. What people do the course,
do you think that's even possible in the ego's world?
I don't know. I mean, again, I think the bottom line to answering this, Ian, is that we just do what we do, and whatever purpose it serves, quote unquote, it does, and there's no plan as such. As we emphasize when we teach, I think I mentioned it on the weekend too. It's not that Jesus has a plan or God has a plan, and this is the role you play. I mean, that's how we look back on it and say that's how it is, but it isn't like that, really. And again, plans occur over time, and time is an illusion. So I think we just do what we do. And
you're basically doing what you like to do, given that there's no
nothing
that one needs to do.
Yes, but I think
Well, actually, can I say something at this point?
Sure,
I mean, you're a very private person, and so am I. And I think if we were doing what we wanted to do, if you want to put it that way, we would not be doing this.
Okay.
Because we're both very private, and so we we don't like the spotlight and all that kind of thing.
You
So
don't feel that you have a mission there?
I don't feel that we have a mission, but I've always felt, let's say, after I left the church and I studied history, I was my major there, I was very upset, for example, reading about how Christianity spread and whatnot, and I always had problems with the church. And I felt that they got it all wrong and how they proceeded and whatnot. And of course, when Kenneth did his book on Gnosticism, I realized I must have been an old Gnostic in a past lifetime because I resonated very much with that. So I've always felt that this corrected and was the statement that that Christianity should have been, which it never was. And so I felt like, yes, I'll devote my life to this in that sense. And I always felt somehow if it was something inward. I can't tell you outwardly, because outwardly it doesn't make sense, but inwardly that's how. And I think you feel the same way. I mean, if we were to choose, right, our life, we would have been off, by ourselves.
Well, I had chosen my life.
Yeah, I mean, as a monk, right. I mean, we would have been off somewhere, in the woods by ourselves, kind of.
I think.
But then you didn't. You chose this, didn't you?
Yeah, but it wasn't even that I chose it. It was like when I saw the course, oh, that's the next step.
Yeah.
It was like. And
Yeah, that's the way it feels.
And
Because it felt right.
yes, this is the next book, so I write this, or this is the next workshop, or this is the next thing.
But people would call it guidance, but I think it's really going to our right mind, and that's it's like, oh, of course, that's the next way. That kind of feeling.
And I think the idea, I like it, what I do, because that's what I do. I mean, and that's, and whatever I do, I've always been like this, whatever I do as best I can, whether it's, practicing on a clarinet, or writing a letter, or giving a talk, or writing a book, or taking care of a person who's ill, whatever it is, you just
Well,
do.
you certainly seem, there's a responsibility of running a place like this, and the ripples of whatever happens here spread out. But you seem very much at peace and
Well, you just
very
do
happy in what you do.
You just do
Of
it.
course works.
Yeah, and I think that the explanation for it is always post facto. It's after the fact. You look back and say, "Oh, that's why I did it."
Yeah,
But how do you really know? I think you do you do what you do.
Yeah.
So following up on that, I've asked you this last time I was here, but
Well,
I didn't get it
maybe
on tape.
maybe I'll give a different answer.
You say you're teaching what the course says, but my feeling is still, though I like what you say, I feel more in tune with you now than any other teachers I've heard. I still feel it's your interpretation. And I think anything that comes from a human being's mouth has to be. For example, you say you read a line from the course and you say what it means is, and then you explain it. Now that has to be your interpretation. Other people might say the course means something else by that.
Right. I can't.
He's right.
Well, I can't answer that for you. Actually, I think when the person asked me that question Friday night in the workshop. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
Well, it's on tape, so when the tape's out, you hear it. But somebody asked me that question, just the exact same question.
Yes.
Yeah. You were sitting over here, the person was sitting over there.
Yeah.
And he was asking about interpretation. I gave the answer. And I think I don't feel that the course has interpretation. I mean, I think the course says what it says. Now you could say, well, who am I to say that what I say it says is what it says? Well, I can't answer that for you. I mean, I can't. I could. I think that's something people.
But you make that claim.
I do. Well, I say this is what it says. Well, I think I'd be dishonest if I didn't say it that way. I see if I kept saying, well, this is what I think it says, but I know it says it. I mean, it would be the same thing as.
But that's.
I
recognise that's your opinion.
I understand. Yes, I understand that, and I realize that people will take that and do whatever it is they want. They'll say, "Oh, yes, he's absolutely right," or "That's his opinion." Or "Who the hell does he think he is? He's being arrogant. He's being psychotic. He's being whatever words they use." I can only do what I know, and it would be the same. It would be the same thing as if when Helen was taking it down, and she would say to Jesus, "I don't agree with what you just said," and he would say, "Well, I'm really sorry, but this is what it is," And actually, that's what would happen every once in a while. And I agree with you. This is what it says, and you could read it. Now, again, that's not stopping anybody from saying, well, I read that same book, and I get something totally different from it. Okay? I mean, that's how it is. But I feel that I would be dishonest to myself as well as to others if I qualified and say, well, this is my interpretation. Now, what I will say is, this is what it says this, it means this. But that doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It doesn't mean you can't say, no, I think it means white. You say it means black, I say it means white.
All right, we'll have to agree to differ on that point.
Yes, I know that, right. I know that, right.
Okay, some of the, you're talking about this point, that some of the passages from the Course are metaphorical and others are to be taken literally. For example, business about where it will say something about you hearing the voice of a God through the day, or something like that. Now, how is the reader to know whether it's a metaphorical passage or whether it's a literal passage?
I think...
Isn't it confusing?
Yes, I think
maybe
it is.
It's all to be taken literally.
I think, well, that is, it's contradictory. And in the Course, Jesus himself says that I'm speaking in symbols. The truth, what I'm saying is beyond symbols. I'm speaking about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as if they were separate, but they're not separate. But I'm speaking to you that way because that's a condition in which you think you're. I mean, there are many, many passages which, in my book, I kind of go over all that, which make it very clear. I mean, it can't be literal that God weeps. That can't be literal. So, I mean, so right off the bat, it can't be literal that God has hands, God has arms, God has a mouth, God has a voice.
Or he takes the last step, or anything.
I mean, it's very clear that you may want to say, well, who's to say which is a symbol? But nobody could argue that there are not parts of the Course that have to be taken as symbols, because otherwise it's silly. I made a big point in the weekend talking about the Song of Prayer pamphlet. Well, I think that came clearly as a correction for people mixing up symbol and reality. Now, the question, how do you know which is which? I've given a kind of a rule of thumb that anything that speaks of a dualistic framework has to be a symbol, because truth is beyond duality and beyond symbols. So anything in the Course that speaks of a duality, such as the Holy Spirit being a voice that speaks to you, or God having a body by reference, because
or
he has
plan,
or anything like that, that has to be a symbol because it's dualistic. And truth, the Course says unequivocally, is beyond all symbols, and is only one. So that's the rule of thumb. I mean, I think, and to me that seems very clear. I don't think that's interpretive. I mean, I think that's...
It also says of itself, it says, Jesus says, words are symbols of symbols, therefore they're twice removed from reality.
And the Course is words.
And then everybody has a concept attached to the word, and pictures, and and experiences, so that they bring their own stuff, as it were, to that word. As an example, the word atonement. It triggers everybody, every translator that has worked with that word wants to change it around to something nice. They don't want to use atonement, and we point out there's that subsection in chapter 3, atonement without sacrifice, and he means that as a trigger word, wants to bring all this stuff up. They want to make it nice. There's always this thing. So I think that the process of the Course is that, it's like brings up eventually everything. All your associations, all your concepts that you're not even aware that you're holding that connect to this word. And so you can let, like you're unconscious, and it brings it up to your conscious awareness.
Why do you think he says things like, the Holy Spirit will help you in anything you ask? If he doesn't mean that.
Well, you see, but I think he answers that. And that's again why I think that people really have to read the whole thing and the Song of Prayer because of that. That he says that I have said to you that the Holy Spirit will answer all of your needs, and I've also said to you there's only one need. And then he says in prayer that this is not contradictory. I think when you understand the concept of a ladder, and that the Course is written on many levels because it meets people where they are. And the Song of Prayer has very clearly that whole concept of a ladder. And you begin at the bottom and you go to the top. And I think then you begin to understand why the Course says the kinds of things it says. Now, this was very clear to Helen. I mean, Helen had knew one. In a sense, what was so surprising to us, and to me, I guess, because I've been doing all this teaching over the years, that what was so clear to Helen, Bill, and me, and we never even thought about asking about it, questioning, because it was so obvious that these were symbols, and as a psychologist, you deal with that all this was very clear. It was only afterwards when people began to take things literally and take them out of context that you began to see, and that's when I began talking about level 1 and level 2, which I did like 3 years ago. I started talking about that because it was obvious people were misunderstanding it.
People still say to me, now there aren't any levels. Where in the Courses to talk about levels?
Yeah, but it does. I mean, he doesn't use that term.
So there can't be levels.
I know that, but then when you read it, I mean, it's again, when you're a psychologist, and it's not an accident that the 3 people closest to were all PhDs, right? And all were basically Freudians. It's not. That's I don't think that's an accident, and I think it's when you have that background, then you're very accustomed to dealing with symbols and levels, and people don't mean what they say. It doesn't mean it doesn't have a meaning, but it doesn't mean that they mean it on the level of form. That's a symbol.
See, I also think it's very comforting, the thing you said, like the Holy Spirit will be with you. It's a comforting thought, because the ego will rush in and say, like, watch out, maybe unconsciously, be careful, the next step, oblivion or something. Yeah. So to have be reassured there's a presence with you.
So the first step is initially people will think, oh, God is their enemy, the Holy Spirit is their enemy. And the first step is to accept that they're friends, not enemies.
Yes.
Right, and that there's help there that you can call on within you. I think that's very important in the process. And the Course says, eventually an experience will come to end your doubting. All right, so, and eventually you're led to an experience where you understand, I think in some way you were able to decipher what's truth and what's illusion, what's real and what's not real. And then all the other stuff falls away. That's what I think happens.
I think that to one other point in, I think when people really understand what the Course says, then all these other issues fall into place. And I think when you understand the whole, then you understand how each of the parts fit into the whole.
Yeah,
when you don't understand the whole, then you take the individual parts and then you say, well, it means this. It's like the blind man and the elephant. An elephant is the trunk, or an elephant is the foot, or whatever. But when you see the whole, and I think that's what takes time. See, and I think a lot of people immediately just get a piece of it and say, that's what it says, and who the hell are you to tell me it doesn't mean that? But when you understand the whole, then the whole thing changes.
What do you think is the biggest single mistake, misunderstanding that students
picking up the Course in the first place?
But other than that,
I think maybe just in line with what we're saying, I think it's not understanding symbol and metaphor. I think that's what leads people to think the Holy Spirit gets some parking spaces, and that it doesn't matter what you do here because it's all an illusion. I think that's the mother of all the other specific problems.
I would agree. Yeah, very much so.
Well, under the general heading of bliss ninnies, I love that word. I don't know where it came from.
It came from a friend of mine who got it from somebody else. So.
Which word?
Bliss-ninny.
Oh.
It was
John
Reed.
Right.
But he got it from some. He's a therapist. I think maybe a patient or something.
So I suppose we could define bliss-ninnies as those who deny the ugliness of the ego, the ugliness of the world, and put a gloss on everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
But my understanding is we begin to see through the
But we
eyes.
forgive them anyway.
Stop it.
So.
As we begin to see through the eyes of the Holy Spirit and accept the Holy Spirit's perception, won't the external world change accordingly? And
The external world, you mean in terms of
well, we change our mind.
Buildings and structures, or my perception of the external
perception
world?
of the external world.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
how do we know they're not doing that? To them, the world is a lovely place. Not a lovely place as such, but their experience of the world is.
I can't
fun.
answer. I mean, there's no way of answering that objectively. I think just speaking as a therapist, over the years you become intuitively aware when people are denying. You can just feel it. I mean, I could give you all kinds of objective things, but basically just feel when somebody is denying. Just to give you a very quick example. Many years ago, I had a patient, this is many, many years ago, and he was away for a couple of weeks on vacation, and he came back, and he was just kind of bringing me up to date what happened on his trip, and he said, on Tuesday I did here, on Thursday my father died, and on Friday I did this, and I said, who? Wait a minute. What'd you just say? All right, well, all right, now you're going to say that person is in the real world, and his father's death is nothing, or you're going to say there's probably something here I should look at. Right? You know, to talk about my father's death as if this is just one more thing I did on my vacation, just go right through it. All right, that's an extreme example. Right? But I think very often when people talk, the Blistons talk about that, you can almost feel that there's something that they're not dealing with. Now you say, well, how do you know that? Well, I can't objectively tell you.
Yeah, I mean, I think myself when I teach that I get a sense intuitively when people are denying or don't want to look at something, and if I get a green light, I'll pursue it. I call it my green light. If I get a red light, I stop, which means don't explore for whatever reason. I don't know, but I think that that's important to. I think one has to know where you're coming from in a sense. If you're coming from your right mind, the exploration of the course, whether you're doing it in front of students or within yourself, falls into place. If you're coming from your wrong mind, nothing will make sense. It'll all be. Because I've seen it with myself. I can read a passage from my wrong mind, and I'll find 5,000 things wrong, and same passage in my right mind, it's different flows.
There must be some people out there who are beginning to take a
I
few
would hope
steps
so.
up the ladder, and they're not just the people here.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sure.
Oh, my heavens, sure.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean.
But then you're not aiming your comments at them, are you? You're aiming.
No,
at
and what I
people who are in
think,
denial.
what I have said, in fact, I might have even said it over the weekend. I don't remember, but that if you're that far advanced, you don't need this course. It's very easy to don't have to be in this class. I mean, or read this book. I mean, that's how, that's then the course is for people who are still in their egos.
You got me there.
Gotcha there. Yes.
Okay, getting through this. Going back to the structure of the course, actually, or the form of the course. The poetic, beautiful passages that you sometimes say beyond our comprehension within this world. What do you think the purpose of those passages is? Are they like carrots to encourage us to go forward, give something to aim for?
I think it's always hard to know to answer a question of purpose. Why is it that way? It is that way, and then we try and understand why it is. Well, I think one major reason was Helen loved poetry. Helen herself felt that this was Jesus' gift to her. That's how she expressed it to me. Now, I don't think it was his personal gift to her as such. And deep down, I don't think that she believed that, but that's how she spoke, on a certain level. But I think it does give the course, I think, among other things, it does give the course a certain dignity, I think, and a certain kind of place, I think, because of how beautifully it's written. And it's written in such a Shakespearean style, Shakespeare being the greatest English poet. A world's poet, just opposed to world's poet. Yes. Well, I would agree with that. Shakespeare. But I think it's very hard to answer questions like that. Just like it's very hard to answer the question why there were all these Jews involved with the course at the beginning, or later. That's a fact. And why is the course written this way? It is beautiful. I think it does also, on a practical level, it does demand that people read it very, very carefully, because you can't speed read that, and forces you to pay careful attention to what you're reading. So I think it accomplishes that. And
also the effect it's having on you. The passages, the words, I think that brings up a lot of stuff too.
I think since so much of the course is form and content, this is a wonderful way of integrating this sublime content with form that is so sublime. So it's,
I remember when I did the workbook on, you're not a victim of the world you see. Well, I was an avid cause person. I belonged to Amnesty International all the way down the line. And I got to that lesson. I went into shock for 3 days. Because if I wasn't a victim, well, no one else was. And it was like, my whole worldview just was shattered. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So it's like you read, just that, and it's like boing. I had to force myself to go on after 3 days of that because it was just so shattering.
The Course says it's only one of thousands of paths, but then talks about the ego. I think it talks about the ego's religion, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Most of those other paths could be classified as ego's religion. Mm-hmm. So, what was my question? So do you think these other paths work? Do you think that you can get to God by following these other paths?
Well, I think.
Is it fostering judgment?
Yes, I think it has been understood that the Course is speaking, and Jesus is speaking in the Course from the Course's point of view, from the Course's perspective. And so from that perspective, almost every other spiritual path is of the ego. Certainly the Western religions, are from the point of view of the Course. But if the Course is not the only spiritual path that will lead you home, then there are other points of view. And if you're following that point of view, then the Course is seen in a different light. It could be seen as the work of the devil, or the work of the ego, or the work of Helen's unconscious, or the work of this, and it's right in some places, wrong in some places. So I think the Course is speaking from its own point of view.
Sure.
And from that point of view, practically everything else is of the ego. That's true. But the Course also says it's not the only point of view.
It's not the only other path.
Yes.
Not the only path, it says. So.
But if you're guilt-ridden, and if you're in a religion that's fostering that, you think you're going to have a genuine.
Well, you see, but I think that one of the values, and again, this is post hoc reasoning, but one of the values of someone like Mother Teresa is clearly she transcended in the love that she just exuded a spiritual path that is filled with guilt and filled with judgment, and and I think she's a wonderful example of how she followed that path perfectly.
Well, she was really old-time Catholic before Vatican II.
But you feel such a loving presence. So I heard her speak on a number of occasions, and when she would speak against abortion, right, you never had the sense of judgment.
Well, you also knew her personally.
Yes, I knew her personally, the other person, but you never get the sense of judgment. I mean, she's very clear that abortion is bad. You shouldn't, but not that if you have an abortion, you're condemned to hell. So I think she's an example of someone who could even be a member of what the Course would say is a very ego-based faith, and yet she does it with such a purity of content that she transcends that, and she then becomes a spokesperson for the love of Jesus.
Form and content thing.
Yes, and I think that's why I'm glad that I had met her and had spent some time with her, and that because she's a wonderful example of that. How many Course in Miracles students would you want to place next to her? Right? As an example of love and ego's expression, and yet she's a member of, again, as Gloria's saying, the old-fashioned Roman Catholic Church, not the
one I grew up in,
not the post-Vatican II Church, but the old-fashioned. So.
Right. My last question I got written here is talking about the court case.
Mm-hmm.
Copyright thing. Well, I don't know what the current. I know it was about 6 weeks ago. Bob Scouts told me that it was still pending October, last week of October or something.
Well, it's not going to be. I really don't think that we should discuss the content of the case because it's now it's in the hands of the lawyer. I mean, we're just not supposed to do that. We're talking, but it's not going to be. Originally, it was supposed to go before the judge October. That's not going to happen. That's pushed up. It's now at a point where there'll be depositions taken, and that takes time. So.
We don't have a date.
Just
So, and maybe to anticipate your next question, I think that the challenge is to be able to go through something like that. And just like I was saying earlier, I get up in the morning and I work on a book, I give a lecture, I take care of a problem here or something. That's what you do. And so if this is now what we are doing, then the challenge is to go through it as egoless as you can and as judgment-free as you can, and you just do what you do.
all right. My question actually was,
Can you do that?
sue someone without
Of course you
attacking
can.
them?
Of course. It's the same. I mean, it's the same thing. You know, I alluded to this in the workshop. It's the same thing as saying, well, if I'm a student of the course and I say the body's an illusion, then why do I go? Why do I become a surgeon? How can I become a nurse? Why do I go to a doctor when I have a strange growth in my body? You know, there's nothing. It's not the suit that's the problem. It's the judgment, the hatred, the anger, separation that you do. In fact, actually, you can make a very strong case the other way and say this is a wonderful classroom, how you go through something that on the level of form obviously is of the ego, right? And you do it without anger and without judgment and condemnation. I mean, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. It's the same thing as we talked a moment ago about the Roman Catholic Church and Mother Teresa. It's wonderful to have somebody who comes from a religion that is so much of the body and so much of judgment and specialness, and yet she goes through it and does it with an attitude that transcends specialness and transcends judgment. And I think this is the same. Why is this any different?
And you think presumably that pursuing this case is a loving act, because you're seeking to preserve the integrity of the cause.
Yes, and I think you have to use the things of the world because that's where we are. Yeah.
See, I mean, the question I think you should ask is, why are people breaking the copyright? See, that's the question. What are their motives? There's a valid copyright there. Why do they feel that they have to steal and do this? Why can't they abide by the form that they chose as their lessons in this world? I mean, they chose to come in or incarnate at this time period with this bunch of laws that we have to deal with. So why do they choose then to break that and not abide by it? See, I think that's the question that should be
Well, I
asked.
think they claim they are teaching the course.
Well, I'm not talking about teaching the course. I'm talking about a valid copyright. There are copyright laws that are international. You know, they're signatories to the Geneva Conference all over the planet. So why do they feel that they should break the international copyright laws? That's what I would ask. Because this is a valid copyright.
But at any
Well,
rate,
I don't know.
at any rate, I think that the issue is simply that you do what you do as best you can without ego, and then you do it. But I think to say that a spiritual person wouldn't have a lawsuit, I think that's the first law of chaos. There's a hierarchy of illusions. That's no different from saying if you're ill, you don't go to a doctor because after all, it's all in the mind, or you don't.
Or you don't take medicine, or you don't take a pill,
or the course says not to correct error, but you're a 5th grade teacher and your pupil says 4 and 4 is 7.
Somebody wrote in your defense here.
What's that?
I got a letter. Yeah.
Really?
It fills almost half a page, quoting it at the bottom in the lighthouses. If some students have difficulty with their decision, we understand and hope it will not detract from their study and practice of the course, etc., etc.
That's from an article that we sent, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I think that's the issue. That I think people confuse levels, and I think that so that there's nothing that you could do or not do. I think it depends on how you do it, and I think that that's as challenging as being a doctor dealing with bodies all day, and yet being a student of the course. And I think that it's not the form that's important. It's the loving content that you supply. And that's why I think this. So, see, again, you could make the case on the opposite side too. That why would not a loving Course in Miracles student be involved in a lawsuit? It could be a wonderful classroom. I'm not saying that's why you do it, but you do because that's what you do. That's what's on the docket today.
Well, I think.
Did you get enough?
I think I've got more than enough. I have one personal question.
Yes.
This is not going to go in the interview, but just about me, regarding sickness and healing.
About what?
Sickness.
Sickness.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. The last 10 years I've been diagnosed as diabetic, and I think the condition's getting worse, and it's causing me a great deal of anxiety. And I don't really know where I'm going. I understand vaguely the principles about it, and seen as a defence against the truth and so forth. And that it's certainly fulfilling as the effect, the desired effect, which is to keep my attention on my body, very much so. But other than that, I don't know where to go with it.
Are you going to a doctor? Are you handling it medically? And you don't want to do that any further? Is that what you
Well, I
think?
think it's getting to the point where I'm going to have insulin injections. It's very complicated.
Well, they have something new that just came out. Shirley Schreiber was here, that she's taking pills. They came out with a new version, and because she was just...
Who is this?
Shirley, who was
She
here this
the one
weekend.
I was always kidding.
Shirley
she was asking
Schreiber.
a question
Oh, yes,
to-
I know.
She was just diagnosed, and she's taking pills.
She has a
Well, I'm
diabetes.
taking some pills, but I don't know what hers are. But from the course's perspective, have you any thoughts on
I think
what this is all about? Because I think it's about I think it's in a sense it's something about cutting off from love that I've done some. I mean, I know we all have.
Well, I don't think it's helpful to wonder about why it is. I think it's important to deal with it right now.
Yeah.
And obviously, you do all the medical things. That's where you are. So you do whatever is the best thing for you to do medically. At the same time, you want to see how you're using the diabetes now. It doesn't matter why you contracted 10 years ago, or whether it's in your genes, or your father had it, or that it's important how you use it now. And if you see it as an expression of your withholding love, then all that you need to do is right now try to be as loving as you can be.
That's why receiving love.
As
Feeling loved.
Feeling loved.
Yes.
Well, it'll be the same thing. Yes, it'll be the same issue there. So, and then see, well, then the diabetes, whatever reason it came, now that it's here, I could use it as a way to help me become a more loving person and learn how to receive love and to extend love, and to get in touch with the fear that I have. And I think what you want to be on your guard against is at the same time you pay attention to your body and take care of it. It doesn't have to become the primary focus of your life.
No.
But I think that if you've already made a connection between the illness and an unloving part to you, then at the same time you're taking care of the illness, medically you want to take care of the unloving part to you. Just see, well, there have been ways where I've withheld love, ways that I've been afraid to accept it, and I don't have to do that anymore. And that's how the course would be helpful, as would be helpful to anything else. And to
Maybe not to punish yourself so much for it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, to be gentle with yourself.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
Oh, the guilt.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a big issue.
I mean, guilt over it because you're a student of the course and you have this?
Well, I had it before I became a
Yeah.
student of the course, but no, there's just,
See,
when
but
I
then
got it, I feel...
but the guilt, you see, but the guilt would not be because of the symptom, the diabetes. The guilt would be because of the withholding love, or the refusal to accept love. That's where the guilt would really be. And I think if you could be
Yes,
clear,
that's
but
right.
that would be helpful because it takes it off the wrong place and puts it in the right place. The guilt is not because you have the symptoms. The guilt is because what the symptoms represent to you, which is again a withholding of love and a refusal of
Well,
love.
the thing is, I've sort of brought this on myself through this.
Well, but we brought everything onto ourselves.
Well, we all have, whether it's a headache or,
And I think the most important thing is to really be gentle with yourself around it.
Yeah, I think, I think core students in general are very harsh on themselves in terms of this. And I think it's a big lesson to have something like that and not condemn and blame yourself and do a mea culpa and all that. That's a big, big lesson,
Yeah.
I think.
So if I could begin to see the gift in that
Yes.
opportunity.
Yes, the opportunity so that you won't condemn and blame yourself. And you might be, if you believe in past lives or future lives, you might be blaming yourself for something in the hologram of time that this could bring up for you to look at. maybe it was displaced onto diabetes, but it's something like the withholding and all that. And so this gives you an opportunity to look at that and try to, ask the Holy Spirit for help to change your mind about doing this, which everybody does, it's my fault.
You see, and then your apprehension of taking injections, your fear of taking injections, it's not because of that. It's because your ego would say, this is the punishment I'm getting because I've withheld love.
Or you're a failure as a core student,
Yeah.
or something to that effect. It would
See,
hit you with.
I think,
Human being.
Yeah.
yes, and that's just guilt, on guilt. I think if you do it right, quote unquote, then whatever happens with your body, you will do it. It won't matter.
Yeah.
You want to split off the symptom from the cause and really try to work on the cause. At the same time, you're taking care of the symptom, but you really, and the cause would be these feelings about yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you for your time. Right.
Do you want to ask the question again?
Ask the question again. How do you apply the principles of the course on your, in your day-to-day life?
I basically do it just as I teach it, and as the course says. I try and live my day as ego-free as possible. And since my day usually involves a great deal of people who are here, and phone calls, faxes, letters, etc., there are lots of opportunities.
Right. And second question, which is related, do you have a particular form of spiritual practice? I know you talk against rituals, but I wonder whether you meditate or anything like that.
Not specifically, no. No, I really don't.
Do you feel nothing at all?
I'm sorry, I
So
do
nothing at all
nothing.
that you do
I do nothing in a kind of a regular ritualistic way. I usually take a walk every morning, but I've been doing that for 40 some odd years. I just like to walk every morning. I get up early and I just.
Do you think meditation has value? Or in
Yes.
that
Oh,
kind of
yes.
practice?
Yes. I think it has value. As you've heard me say many other times, I think it's a two-edged sword. I think you could end up becoming too dependent on meditation or any other form of spiritual discipline. But I think anything which helps someone become more peaceful and more focused, I think is beneficial. Again, the danger is only that it could turn into a special relationship, and then you have trouble.
Do you meditate?
Not usually, no, anymore. I used to do more, but no.
On your mountaintop in Israel?
I'm on top in Israel, and I'm quiet often, but not in any kind of prescribed way.